Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jen Thomas, and I am an assistant professor here in the Landscape Architecture program. And today we wanted to talk a little bit about an internship program that we initiated this summer. The National Park Service, specifically our guest, David Sheehan, had contacted Virginia Tech and our program about collaborating and getting interns involved in some of the work that needs to be done along the Blue Ridge Parkway. And so what we did last, let's see, yes, thank you. I tend to walk around, so just fair warning to the camera. So we posted the internship job. There were a lot of internships available to students last summer, but we did get a few applicants, and Kate Adams and Lizzie Davis were the ones that became the interns. And so our first project, there were several projects that Dave and I had talked about, but the first one that they wanted to do was the assist in the documentation of a historic segregated picnic area in Downton Park, which is called the Woods Picnic Area. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And so what I'm going to do first is give you a brief overview of the parkway and kind of the myth almost, or kind of rhetoric around the parkway, because it's a much beloved landscape. It's a very designed landscape. But it's also got some challenges in terms of how that history is being told, because it includes some people and excludes others, right? And so part of this initiative is about trying to correct that, number one, but also create a more inclusive and whole history of experiences along the parkway. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'll give you an overview, then David's going to talk a little bit because he is the landscape architect for the Blue Ridge Parkway. And then Kate and Lizzie will talk to you all a little bit about their experience and what they did this summer. Because at the moment what we're doing, it's still a work in progress, but we're composing a HALS level, that's a Historic American Landscape Survey, history of the Woods Picnic area, which is challenging because the documentation is pretty sparse, right? But that's what we're working on right now. So, okay, so how many of you have been to the Blue Ridge Parkway or on it, more or less? Probably most people in here, right? If you haven't, I would definitely urge you while you're in this area to go. It's a 469-mile designed landscape. It started construction in 1935, and it has a lot of that kind of rustic looking structures throughout, partly because it was first started under the Works Progress Administration. There it is. And so you see that kind of 1930s National Park Service aesthetics going on with some of the infrastructure. So it goes all the way from Shenandoah National Park down to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And so why are we talking about this in landscape architecture? Well, there were a number of landscape architects and engineers that worked on the Blue Ridge Parkway. The first among them being Stanley Abbott, shown here, and this is probably from the 50s or 60s. But he was appointed when he was only 25 years old to work on the parkway. And Abbott's direction of the Parkway project was visionary, from land acquisition and road selection, environmentally sensitive design, and enlightened management practices. Now this is from the Cultural Landscape Foundation. I might challenge a few of those assertions, but because it's a complicated history, which we'll get into in a moment. But nonetheless, Stanley Abbott is a hugely important landscape architect of his era, and was very influential on the Blue Ridge Parkway. So, one of the things that we've been looking at, because if you kind of Google or look at a library, history of the Blue Ridge Parkway, a ton of stuff comes up, right? There's also all kinds of things that, tourist manuals, there's, geological books about it, there's, flora and fauna books, et cetera, et cetera. There is a ton of literature about the Blue Ridge Parkway. One of the more influential ones that's written quite a bit about the Parkway and has had a lasting kind of influence on that narrative is Harley Jolly. He's written 3 books in total. The first one in the 1960s, the second one at the 50-year anniversary of the Parkway, and then the last one was Painting with the Comet's Tail. He started getting very poetic. The touch of the landscape architect on the Blue Ridge Parkway, right? So he was getting a little florid with his description of it. But nonetheless, these histories and the way that people describe it, because it's a much beloved landscape, and people have very sentimental attachments to it. Those that have, either driven it or repeatedly visited and or camp on it or picnic, etc. Because it is a beautiful drive. It's a beautiful experience in many, many ways. And there's all kinds of overlooks and things that you get to stop at along the way. And so there's other books that have come out more recently, like there's this one that focuses specifically on the scenic views, right? Because there's multiple points along the way where you stop and you can look over the Blue Ridge Mountains, and it's quite spectacular. There's also things like this where you can have these picture books of the construction. And then this one was particularly interesting, and they came out in 2014, I think. But Anne Wisnet, she's a professor at Duke, and she wrote this. This was a direct result of some of the work she did for her dissertation. And so she starts the book out talking about very kind of glowingly about the Parkway and the experience of it, right? But then at the same time, she kind of questions that narrative a little bit, and she also explored in depth some of the challenges that, if you let's see, go to the next one. So, she talks poetically about the experience and this is Craggy Gardens, and, it's lovely when the rhododendrons are in bloom, and the fall colors are lovely, and it's a very pleasurable kind of ride, right? Because it's specifically engineered for vehicles. You can't go more than 45 miles an hour. And it's these lovely kind of gentle curves as you drive along. But in her work, in the book, and then also in this essay that she wrote before the book came out, she researched and wrote about in depth some of the challenges inherent with the land acquisitions that were required for the Blue Ridge Parkway, which included a lot of contentious conversations and letters and all kinds of things. It's a fascinating, just the land acquisition history alone is really interesting. But one thing in particular she examined was the tension between the Cherokee people and their land and some of the land that the federal government wanted for the Parkway. And so she drills down quite deeply into that. Because that's more towards the Great Smoky Mountain. What is that?
David, I think you need to mute for just a minute.
It's very segregated.
You are presenting now, are you? Because I can't hear anything.
Uh-oh. Oh, no. Let's see. You just push this for Okay. So she talked quite a bit about that, and she also was looking into a little bit about the history of African American experiences on the Parkway. And since this book has been published, she has really switched gears and has focused, that's kind of the primary drive of her current research, is African American history and African American experiences in the national parks, not just on the Blue Ridge Parkway, but in national parks. So that's kind of a quick overview of the Parkway. And so the site that we were going to work on, or we are working on, is in Downton Park, which is just across the Virginia-North Carolina border. It's in North Carolina, so it's highlighted there on the left. And then this is a map that just shows the area of concentration where we worked. Within the park itself, there's a building called the Bluffs Coffee Shop that has a long history. There was also a gas station there. And then the picnic areas that we're studying are behind that. And so this is a little snippets that I took from the National Park Service website about it. and they highlight how popular the Bluffs Coffee Shop was. In fact, you know, we were reading correspondences between various people about the traffic problems because it was so popular. They were having parking and even just kind of vehicular circulation around that area. So they had to expand some things. And this is just a view. This is the coffee shop, and then this was the gas station area. And so here is one of the drawings that I found while we were visiting Asheville, North Carolina. We went down there in August to visit the archives and the headquarters where David works. And so David and I were rifling through. These are not archive drawings, but these are the ones that the engineers have in their office. But it shows where our woods picnic area is. The circle is where the coffee shop is, and then the other circle there is where a historic lodge was built back in, I think, the mid 20th century. That's currently in disuse. But you'll notice on this map that there's little kind of wording that says abandoned. There's like taped on there after the fact. Because the picnic area that we're researching has in fact been abandoned for a long time. So here's just a closer up view of it, as well as what it looked like much earlier in the 20th century. Right, so you see that old stop sign, and you also see that kind of lovely road grading that they did, right? So, we started looking at some documents that already existed about Downton Park and searched specifically for mentions of either the woods picnic area and African Americans along the parkway. And this one, which was from 2006, does mention it a bit and emphasizes the fact that planning for racial segregation was in fact part of the planning with the recreational amenities at that time, because remember, this was back in the 1930s, although it continued for a bit after that because of the Jim Crow era continuance. But let's see. So, and the bottom line is the woods picnic area, which was behind the coffee shop, was for African Americans, right? And then the meadow picnic area was the one that was designated for white people. And then they go on to talk a little bit about some of the tension there, because it was very much about keeping people separate, people of different races separate. And there was a large group of African Americans that went there back in the 1940s, and they were in the the other area, and they were asked to leave, and they refused to do so. And so it became a bit of a event, they call it the incident. But after that, things started to change a little bit in terms of having areas for both black and white people, although I think the tensions were still pretty pronounced. So I just briefly want to mention people that, African Americans that were traveling around in vehicles starting in the 1930s onward would use this guide called the Negro Motorist Green Book. How many people have heard of this? A few people, okay. So this was a guide that African Americans used to find safe and friendly places to eat, to lodge, to get gas, to get car repairs, et cetera, et cetera. And it covered the entire United States. And so this was actually started by this gentleman here, Victor Hugo Green. He was a mail carrier, and he started this all on his own and was involved with it right up until the 1960s when it stopped being published. So here is just an image of a Esso gas station, because Esso was actually one of the friendlier gas companies. They, in fact, advertised to and encouraged African Americans to buy their products. So that was a popular company and gas station to use for African Americans. Now, this is from the Shenandoah National Park. We didn't find any evidence in the archives or in the readings that we had done that there were signs like this in Downton Park, but this is an example of how sometimes landscapes were clearly marked in very specific ways about who could go where, right? And so this is one that shows the Lewis Mountain Negro area, which is decidedly separate from where white people would visit the Shenandoah. So these were some of the early documents that we looked at that talked about the Blue Ridge Parkway and or Downton Park specifically, but again, they were pretty sparse on details about African American experience. And luckily, since about 2009 onwards, there has been increased interest and a real shift, frankly, in understanding African Americans' experience outdoors with recreation. And so there's two studies on the left there that are specifically about the Blue Ridge Parkway. And then this book that came out in 2014 called Black Faces, White Spaces, where she really explores this idea of, what is this relationship and reimagining the relationship of African Americans with the outdoors. Because, frequently when you look at advertisements for National Park Service, for the Blue Ridge Parkway especially, the people that are recreating and enjoying themselves are almost always white, right? And so it's very clear, it demonstrates to people that it is a decidedly white space, right? And so imagine what it's like if you're African American and traveling around and enjoying it, but you still have to be very careful. And the interesting thing is, the Green Book, and I looked at several editions of it, several years of it, there was no mention of the Blue Ridge Parkway at all in the Green Book. So I'm not really sure what's that all about, but we're going to kind of keep following that. So it's not completely done yet. There is another person in the Park Service that's working on a history of African American experiences for the National Park Service. I'm not sure if it's out yet. It was supposed to come out this month. But it is kind of an exciting time that there's a real shift happening and examination of what these experiences have been and why they're not included more fully in the histories of such important national parks. So that's all I'm going to say. I'll be quiet now. And I'll hand it off to David, and hopefully it won't sound, supernatural in here.
I'm going to mute me so that, David, you can talk. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I was going to begin.
Sorry.
Y'all hear me?
Okay.
Okay, great. You see on this slide is from the Blue Ridge Parkway's guiding document, our foundation document, latest one written 2016, which describes the purpose of the Blue Ridge Parkway, as described in our foundation document. And I chose this picture because for me the Parkway is quite unique in many ways, but particularly in its ability to span scale. And I didn't quite hear the beginning, but to discuss the physical scale of the Parkway, we're nearly 470 miles long, connecting 2 states over 29 counties. And if you add in Shenandoah National Park and Great Smokies, the Parkway connects Front Royal, Virginia to Gatlinburg in Tennessee. And just thinking about that scale, that large scale, encompassing the central and southern Appalachian region, and encompassing such a great distance that down here in Asheville, I say Appalachian, and up in Front Royal, I'd say Appalachian. Just the differences in culture can actually, to me, kind of be referenced in that one word and how it's pronounced at one end of the Parkway versus the other end of the Parkway. It was created as a national rural roadway with limited access, and it's the longest road planned as a single park in the U.S. Travels 5 mountain ranges, encompassing 75 different vegetative plant communities. They go from 600 feet at the James River to over 6,000 feet down here in North Carolina. That's just the geographic kind of breadth. Down to, you talk about it as a designed landscape, the design details that you see right here in this tunnel. And I'll point your direction to the fog lines. This is a situation, the only situation on the entirety of the Blue Ridge Parkway, entering, going through and exiting a tunnel where you see fog lines on the road. One of the situations where safety has trumped design. Because this experience of traveling the parkway was designed down to that smallest detail, no fog lines, in order to allow the road to better blend into the terrain, blend into the landscape. Just that breadth and scale from the smallest details to the span of the entirety of the parkway is one of the things that makes it quite unique. Also, the idea of it as a designed experience to offer what we call a ride-a-mile, stop-a-mile experience. That includes scenic pullouts, recreation areas and opportunities, in historic sites, and interpretation of the story of Appalachian culture. You can go on to the next slide if you like, while I kind of talk here. And I wanted to talk about that interpretation of Appalachian or Appalachian culture. The designers made very specific choices to what stories to tell in that design. And that's what we're talking about here. Some stories got told, others were left out. And we're at a critical juncture where the Blue Ridge Parkway and other parks, particularly the Blue Ridge Parkway, is in the process of, we're studying those stories. The story of segregation, the development of the parkway, as we're doing with Woods Picnic Area, the story of African-American communities in rural Appalachia that has been untold in many areas, or been left out of the story altogether. So to talk about the design, a critical observer might even say in times contrived experience. I don't necessarily agree with that in many ways, but Humpback Rock's farm, for example, in Virginia, is a replica of an Appalachian farm. It is presented as an existing farm that was there. Most folks don't realize that it was built by the Park Service. Some folks might consider that to be a contrived story. I would say it was a design element that was decided upon as part of the development of the parkway. But that mission to allow folks to choose their own adventure, as I like to describe, a 470-mile window into the greater Appalachian region, that folks can choose their own adventure and how they experience it via the vehicle of the design landscape of the parkway. What you see here is the Blue Ridge Music Center near Galax, Virginia, which is entirely devoted to telling the story of mountain music, particularly in the Galax area, which is considered one of the prime generators or birthplaces of Appalachian music. Just to highlight that mission. But we can move on to the next one. Because as I talked about the choices that were made, Mabry Mill, which was a mill that has been restored for folks to see. But it's not the whole story, and that's what we're here to talk about. And I think Jen, we've discussed a forthcoming by Dr. Eric Devlin, supposed to come out this month, about segregation, particularly in Virginia National Parks, which should be coming out. And Blue Ridge Parkway is a case study in that report, which I'm sure will be very interesting, particularly the folks who worked on this project, but everyone here to further discuss that. I also wanted to talk about the scale of the time scale of the parkway. The construction of the parkway spanned from 1935 to 1987. before that final portion was done. So if you think about the cultural changes that were occurring in the greater U.S. culture while that was occurring, that initial development was done at Jim Crow South, which is a story of most of the parks in the American South. And it was political from the beginning, as Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia haggled over who was going to get more mileage of the parkway. But it kind of highlights that the political aspect of the development, in particular of Park Service administrators working and administering parks and resources in states where local and state law was not always the same as federal law, and how they navigated those situations. I think Woods Picnic Area is a very interesting case study at the scale of one location. They can provide a lot of insight into what was going on in on a larger context. But maybe with this last picture, your window to the Southern Appalachians, you can see the parkway cut heading off to the southwest. You go to the next, please. I added a few landscape development plans. You see there, when you drive the parkway, when you experience the parkway, there are over 900 design vistas. So not just your pullouts, we have parking vistas, canopy axial vistas, and roadside vistas, but approximately 914 of the length of the parkway. So you see the detail that was put into the design, the development of the design. Every aspect of the experience, the entirety of the landscape was designed. Go into the park land use maps, which still we still have land use maps that they essentially that we use to manage the parkway, to manage the resources we have. The last thing that I would leave you with in discussion of the parkway as a whole is also the ability to span different contexts, if you will, natural resources and cultural resources, as well as historic resources. And it's kind of unique position as a design landscape that at its inception blended the latest high technology of highway development with landscape architecture on a grand scale. In order to give an experience that shows both the natural resource context, the cultural resource context, and one that is historic in its own right today, but has also maintained both its historic integrity, but also its relevance into modern times. I think this group here, I'm excited for, and I hope you're excited to hopefully join the Park Service and other land managers in order to define what that relevance is, to help manage the relevance of resources like the Blue Ridge Parkway in the next century.
Thank you, David. Or if you want to go ahead and mute, awesome. I'm going to wrap this up. We've only got a few minutes, so I'm just going to fly through the rest of the slides. But I wanted to show you, so here you can see is another plan view of the Woods picnic area on the bottom part. So it's kind of set on a really wooded slope back behind the Bluffs Coffee shop. And there are about 35 designed picnic units. You can see these little rectangle tables here are the actual picnic tables. Here's another one. It's up at the top now, though. So it's sort of this winding path that goes through the woods. And the idea was you kind of have this enclosed picnic area. All of the tables were made with stone, as you can see. On the left image, you can kind of see, this is actually a site image that we took this summer in visiting the Woods picnic area. So it is abandoned today, and it has been since I think the 60s or 70s. But you can kind of see that's what it looks like, and they're super kind of worn out. If you look on the left, let me see if you can see my cursor. Yeah, if you see my cursor, here's actually one of the picnic area, or the picnic tables. So the whole spot is like super overgrown, really dense vegetation. Super like muddy and hard to find everything because nobody's really been here in a really long time. Here's another just cool image, overgrown stuff. A lot of them are like actually fallen over, as you can see here. And then Izzy's
I added this photo. The one on the left, those are the same thing. So the right was just like a photo from the 1940s showing the grill, and then the left is what we found. And when we were walking through, we saw some that didn't even have the grates, so we were really like confused over what it was. And then some of them were still intact, like the one that's photographed, but a lot of them weren't. And so this is another photo. Basically what we were looking for was the picnic tables and the water fountains, and then we found the grills, so we kind of added that in our like site mapping. And then we also were marking out where we were finding like running groundwater. And so like when we did the archives, we were looking for like some specific things. And then there was this passage about African American family that came that wanted to use the meadow picnic area, which was specifically for white people. And there was like this confrontation. So this is just examples about how different readings had different things to say about it. So this one was saying there was just a confrontation that arose. This one was saying there was an incident, but the Parkway offered no details. And then this one got more into it and kind of told you like what was going on about it. And then this one specifically went into kind of more of like the reasons why it was like that, is they didn't mark outwardly, like Jen was saying about the big signs that were saying like segregated. A lot of the areas in this area weren't marked specifically, so that could lead to some confusion. And then this one was really interesting because this went on to say that there was an incident that went on to the point where they wanted to call the police and get legal authority involved. And the African American family was basically like, go ahead, like, because we need to like address this. And then this is how we did the mapping. We basically went through and walked the site and then had like this little app on our phone, just we're like pinpointing where everything was in that area. So like the blue were the water fountains, and then the white were the picnic tables, or red were the picnic tables, and white were the or yellow were the grills in that area. I think that's the last one.
Yeah, I think that's all we have. It's 2:30, but if anyone has any questions, either for us or for David. Oh, sorry, this says 2:30. My bad. Well,
10 minutes.
We'll open it up for questions if anyone has any. Yeah.
Questions.
Sorry about the technical difficulties.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll ask one.
Sorry. We'll get to
You
you.
all speak to how the Historic American Landscape Survey fits into the grander scheme of managing Woods Picnic Area?
No, I did not.
If I could
Yeah, you wanna-
briefly
Okay.
mention that. So, yeah, this work that Kate and Lizzie did to document the Woods picnic area is specifically to write the historic American landscape survey history for this site, to describe in formal terms what exactly is there. And in at Parkway, we have a contract with the Historic American Landscape Survey, which is a group of National Park Service employees that do this work to document the Woods picnic area. However, the price went up over our budget. So we only had enough money to pay for the drawings and the pictures next year. So this history that this project is writing is allowing us to finish to the complete documentation of Woods picnic area. And the importance of that is this being a contributing element to the historic design of the parkway, as well as its integrity. The first step in being able to either restore portions or all of it, or do any projects there to interpret the site, is knowing thoroughly exactly what is there and the significance of what is there in the context of the historical significance of the parkway itself. So this is going to allow us to do more active management and interpretation.
Thanks for clarifying that, yeah. So, did you still have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, one, how long is like the loop that y'all took connecting all these sites, and two, did the scale of that present any challenge?
David, he just asked, like, how long is this loop that we kind of walked around the picnic area, and like a site scale mostly?
Yeah, it's really big, like, did that present any challenges for you guys?
I think that should be on one of the slides. Beginning there, I think we can.
Yeah, if I can take this one. If you look at this map, so we were just sort of exploring. We had no idea what to expect when we got there. And because we went in July, it was really overgrown and really muddy. So we actually didn't get to all of the picnic tables. We just kind of found maybe like 20 of them. But I mean, you can kind of see this. I mean, unfortunately, there's no scale on here. Oh, there is. Okay. It's like it's a really steep slope in the woods, and like you can kind of see the size of the building right there. So it's a pretty big area. I don't have like an acreage for you, but yeah, it was interesting and kind of hard to navigate. And then like we would get to a picnic table, we would mark it, and then we would walk around and circle back and be like, wait, have we already been to this one? Because it all just looked the same. Yeah, it was really kind of interesting, but. Yeah.
I think the thing that makes it feel a lot bigger is the slope. And the brush didn't help because it was more like we were walking vertically than horizontally, so we like kind of had to climb over things and look out for stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if this work would be like a series of other places within the parkway, because like I know it's like the intended is like a report, a cultural landscape.
A document, yeah, yeah.
So is it gonna be only for this picnic area, or is it like a one of the series?
So,
Areas around the park?
Yeah, great question.
David, the question is, I guess, will this project and this document serve as a model for more sites along the parkway to do more reports?
In a way, yes. The Historic American Landscape Survey is a formalized report format. So it's a formalized documentation. Standardized would be actually a better word to use.
Froze.
Yes,
Well.
basically, yes, it will.
Oh, it's frozen.
Okay.
Well, and part
Well-
of the reason that, we do things like, because you may have heard of the Historic American Building Survey, there's the Historic American Engineering Record.
That is the question.
And HALS. Yeah, you faded out a little bit, yeah. towards the end, but yeah, we got it. And all of those are really ways to record significant structures and significant landscapes, right, built works. And a lot of those actually serve as historic records because frequently things will be, they'll either kind of dissolve into the landscape or they actually get torn down because of other things that people want to build. And so they serve as a historic record in perpetuity. And I've used many of those over the years for places that no longer exist, but the report was there before things got demolished. So it's partly a way to kind of record important places for posterity and for their cultural significance. So. Questions? Alrighty, well, thank you all so much. I know it's Friday before break, so it's a little tempting to wander off, but I appreciate everybody coming here and listening to what we're working on.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.